everyone, this is week 8. I'm going to be showing you how to do texture painting. So if you want a hand painted kind of effect for your materials, you'll probably be using texture paint. I did want to point out if you wanted a more like cell shading style to your materials, so more like very cartoony. I did post a video for that on the class resources page on our Discord. It is this weird workaround of using the principled BSDF, but it'll give you a cool just like cell shading effect if you want that. But for today, I'm going to be showing you how to use texture paint. So first thing you want is a UV unwrapped object. Let me make this full screen. Okay. So I have my cat UV unwrapped. I would recommend going through and nicely UV unwrapping the way that I showed with our spoon, where we've placed our cuts and then we've organized it to lay out in a way that makes sense to us. This UV unwrap is the scenario where we don't actually have to have everything scaled proportionally. Usually for the texture paint, you're going to want your largest pieces to be the pieces with the most amount of detail. So if I was needing more detail on the cat's face, I could scale that up and like leave the like feet pieces smaller. So that's different from if I was using the UV unwrap just for a repeatable texture. And then you also want to make sure you have a good gap between all of your islands. So make sure you have your UV unwrap, otherwise you aren't going to see anything properly. So do that first. And then now we're going to hop in to a new workspace. So this will be like our third material workspace. We had UV editing, shading, but now we're going to go into texture paint. And when you go in here, you should see your object is like either a hot pink or this like purplish color. Whenever your object is missing material information, just doesn't have a material assigned, it's going to have this hot pink or like purple color. So the situation right now is that it doesn't actually have a texture assigned to it. So what we're going to do is on the right side in our active tool and workspace settings, make sure that's open. It should have just automatically opened, but in case it's not, it's that very top icon on the right. We're going to go where it says no textures and hit the plus sign. You can see you can have all the different kinds of maps we're familiar with for plugging in a PBR material. So you technically could make like a normal map in this format. We're going to be putting in the base color. And then I'm just going to change the color to match whatever the main color is I want for my cat. So I'm going to make a gray cat. And then I'm going to uncheck alpha. And then when I hit OK, you should see your object become that main color. And then I do have to change one more thing probably before I can get started. So if I just like left click on my cat, you can see I did a little spray paint effect. And ideally, I should be seeing it also happen on my unwrap. If you don't see it, so I like drew down white, I should see white be appearing over here. If you don't see that, like I don't see it, you're going to go to the top of that screen, so this left side, the top where there's that little like image icon. Just open up that drop down and then select that texture that you just created. Oh, and you can't even see my like unwrap really well because I chose a gray. That's too similar, but it should have a vague outline of your UV unwrap, and now it's showing that white effect that I put on the cat. So you might notice that I can paint on the cat. It appears over on the left. I can paint between where my seams are. So this is the seam between my head and the body, and you can see it can continuously go across those two islands of the unwrap. You can also paint on the islands, and it'll, where is this one? if I know where I'm painting. I can paint on the islands and it'll show up on my model. The one issue with this though is if you do go near any of those seams, it's gonna just like have a hard outline. So keep that in mind. You might need to like go back in and make it look a little bit more natural. Um, this is the most natural looking cat. And then also when you're painting, you might notice it kind of, what I get painted depends on my point of view of the object. So if I just go over this, left click and paint that whole thing, you can see it only painted whatever was visible. So this was being blocked, that whole backside was being blocked. So be careful with how your view is positioned. You might need to like rotate around a lot to make sure you get all these little corners and everything. But you have all these brush settings on the right side. You also have them at the top of the screen. You can use your tablet again for this. It'll just be like you're drawing in Photoshop. So you can change your color, you can change your brush size, you can change the strength. The hotkey for the size of the brush is F. There's also one for the strength, but I don't remember what it is. But on the go, you can quickly change it by hitting F and rescale it. There's also different brush settings where, I mean, I'm not too experienced with this, but ones I would switch between are mix and multiply. Mix is more of like applying a color over the other. Multiply can give me a more like shading effect if I want to draw in my own shadows, where it would go on top of the texture below, etc. So you can like spend a lot of time in here, really draw out a nice hand painted texture. And one thing I need to point out though is you need to save the this drawing, this painting you made, this beautiful painting, separately from your Blender file. So if I went and like saved Blender and then quit out and opened back up, my texture would be blank. So unfortunately, you have to save this individually from Blender. Just saving Blender isn't going to save this. It kind of works like the renders where you have to like save them individually. It's just like a working memory when it's in Blender. So whenever you have this little star, so the top left corner, next to image, that means there is unsaved progress on here. So click on image and you can do save. First time I would do save as. Make sure it's going in the folder you want. It automatically is probably going into your project folders. You could change it to go to your materials if you want. Cat color. But now you can see that star went away. But if I again paint again, it's going to give you that star to signal that you need to save it. So make sure you're saving it periodically in addition to saving Blender. So they're separate, unfortunately. I don't want people to lose their work. So yeah, you can paint your own material on. You can go as toonish or realistic as you want. You could even paint it to have like shadows and like different effects. But this is hooked up to a PBR material. So if I go to my shading workspace, you can see in the nodes, the node editor, I have that principled BSDF with this texture image that I was just coloring. So that's what that's hooked into color, but technically I could go in, I can change my roughness if I need to, I can make it metallic, I can put a subsurface on, And I can also hook up this base color that I made into the subsurface color to match. So you have all of the sliders at your disposal to further refine the material, but what you're doing right now is just to like give the base color. So I do want to show one other application of texture paint. So this is more just a hand painted effect to be more like toonish or like a stylized realism. But you can also use this to like put more variations on your objects. So if you have like, if this was a metal cat, I can pick and choose where to put like rust or grime buildup. So if you're actually like really interested in doing textures, this is more of the workflow you'd be doing. You'd be probably using an external program like Substance, but this is a nice like mini version where you can do similar things where you can paint on the model like where to have like water damage or like splatters of dirt. So for that, we're going to be using an image of like a reference image of a material and kind of using it as a stencil, they call it, to pick and choose where we place it. So to do that, we kind of have to switch between two windows, so it's a little confusing, but let me first reset my color to white because that'll have an effect, which I'll point out. But first we want to go down to where it says texture. Texture mask is also a thing, but that's more for your brush. So we want texture. And it opens up this window. We have to hit new to bring in a new one. But to actually bring something in, this is when we have to open up a different menu set. So this opened up a spot to bring in a reference, but now we have to go tell it what reference to bring. So to do that, you're going to go down to the very bottom icon, your texture properties, the little red checkerboard. And once you're here, there's this type drop down you can click in. There's some pre-existing ones you could now go in and paint on if you wanted. This might be helpful if you're painting your normal map, or I guess your bump map in this case. But you could play around with any of those settings. But I want to show you how to bring in an actual image, so I'm going to hit image or movie. And then we just have to open one. So go down to open, and then find where your materials are, which I never remember. Documents, VCO, fall, materials. Let's put on some metal. And you want, I usually use like the color map from my PBR materials, but technically you can go in and find any JPEG online and use that. I just know the PBR materials are already like good quality and a good resolution, so that's what I usually go with. But any image really you could bring in. And the default way that this works now is it's going to lay a tileable version of this onto the cat. So you can see it's like a seamless tileable version because my image is the seamless tileable material. So if you just want a more like general placement of it, you can do this, but there is one setting that I'm going to show you how to change if you want more control over what part of your image you're placing where on the cat. So right now, like I can't really tell which part of the metal texture is going where. It's just spreading the whole thing over it. But I can tell it if I like a specific part of this image and I want it across his face, I can do that. So for that, we have to go back up to our workspace tools, the little screwdriver and wrench, and go down to where our texture was brought in. And we're going to switch it from tiled to stencil. And you can see we have the little metal texture. I have like this grimy, rusty metal. And when I change it to stencil, you can see the image pops up in my viewport, and depending on how it's laying over my cat, and if I hit left click over it, it's going to paint that part of the image onto your mesh. So if I wanted this white splotch of the metal, you can see I can get that painted on. We have a few hotkeys to work with this. One is holding down right click to move it around in the viewport. So you can see I have those white chunks in there. If I want them in a specific area, I can right click, place it there, and then left click to do the actual coloring. There are a few things to point out when you're working with this is how zoomed in or zoomed out you are changes the scale of how this would lay on your object. So try to stay at the same distance from your object just to keep it at the same scale. Also, if you paint near like edges, it's going to start distorting that material. So you can see it's starting to stretch on the cat because when I laid it, it went on a face that's kind of like going away from where my camera is rather than like nicely faced up with it. So when you're painting this on, try to just like have it centered and paint in the more like center part of the object and then rotate to get the rest. So you're gonna have to be moving around a lot, but have it so you're just painting on the inside of the object and get the exterior parts by rotating your view around and working your way around, just so you know you won't have any distorted parts of your mesh. And again, I could be picking and choosing which parts I want, but usually if you just like paint over it, it'll blend together really nicely. So right click to move it around. We can also scale it and rotate it so we can do all the basic transformations to our actual like pattern we're using. Let me make sure. Yes, okay, scale is shift and right click. So shift right click if you want to rescale your template. You can also do control right click to rotate it. If you can do control right click and you accidentally like did that and want it to go back to 0, you can go back down to the texture settings and change the angle back to 0. And then I guess one more tidbit that I always forget about is if you did bring in an image that isn't square, it's going to force it to be a square. So if you wanted it to stay, if you had like a I don't know how to say this word, rectangular image and it came in squashing down the texture and kind of distorting it, you can hit image aspect and it'll put your image at whatever ratio it's supposed to be. So that's pretty much it for this. You can now go in, put this in specific parts of the cat. I can pull in a different texture and like have a different type of metal in different parts, or like I said, I could have more rust in certain areas, or I can cover this whole cat in this and then bring in like a muddy texture and kind of pick and choose where I want mud splattered. Once you're done working with this, you can always, because you might notice now if I want to like go back with my normal paint, this is always here now. Oh, and one thing, I forgot to point out, you can change the color of this. So if I want like a reddish tint to it, if I change my color dropper to red and then paint on it, you can see it's like got this reddish hue like cast over it. Same with any other color. So you can alter the color with the color drop. And now if you want this to go away to be able to go back to our color dropper, you're just going to hit the X next to the texture, and now you can see I'm just painting with solid white again. If I did want to bring back that stencil, I'm going to go back down to my texture properties and select it. You don't have to hit plus new because it already exists. If you did want a new one, you would hit that, but I just want to pull the one back in that exists, and now I can paint with it again. So that's all for this. There's a lot of opportunities to have more realistic materials. And you can also do a more like stylized, like toonish version of realistic materials. Just depends on how you want to use it. And I do want to point out that if you painted on your like base color onto this, and now you wanted like, if you like hand painted wood and you wanted to make a normal map, I would recommend taking that into Photoshop and using that filter that makes normal maps. I did post a video of how to do this again on class resources. It's called like Photoshop Make Normal Maps, but that is available for you to reference. But you would just pull in this image that you have saved. It's now available to like find in your folders. You would just bring that into Photoshop and then apply the normal filter, and then you can go in and plug it in like you would any normal map. So that's all for today. Let me know if you have any questions on this, if you want me to expand further on anything. But I'll see you guys next time.